So today, just gonna really dive into the Lesser Celandine topic and focus in on identification tools and tips, and get right into it. So, like I mentioned, I work on our early detection rapid response program, which really targets high priority noxious weeds that generally aren't abundant in the region. And one of the ones that we do a lot of work with is garlic mustard this time of year. Spurge laurel knotweed is another one that we focus throughout the Tryon Creek watershed, and then some others as well. You can kind of see where we are related to other SWCDs in the area.
I'll give a quick shout out to Liz and her garlic mustard team who just closed out their garlic mustard season with I don't think there was champagne involved, but there was virtual champagne involved.
Nice.
So thank you, Liz, and the entire group that helped with that effort.
Yeah, I definitely can't thank you guys enough, because I mean, you can see from that map, I have about 400 sites over the West Hills, and it's always been really nice to know that Arnold Creek is being taken care of by the neighbors, because it's a struggle to get to all of our sites. Not that there's necessarily a large quantity, but it's a lot of land to cover and a lot of people to reach in a short amount of time. So really appreciate the neighborhood associations work on that. So getting to another, what I would consider a high priority noxious weed, Lesser Celandine. Unfortunately, it's not one that we target throughout our district for eradication, because it's increasingly common, and it gets spread around easily through the plant trade, through unintentionally through stream corridors, and just like natural movement. It's really well adapted to moving quickly over the landscape. And then, unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't get identified as a high priority till it's like kind of too late. So that's a little bit of the background. We've been working on this for about the last 10 or so years, but it's been a struggle, I think, in Arnold Creek, just because there's been a few different there's always obstacles and finite amount of resources. But I'm a big believer in knowledge is power, and I really have seen efforts of few resources going a long way. So I do think this is one that can be managed effectively if you have the energy and determination. So you can see a few different key characteristics of the celandine plant here. It obviously has these pretty yellow flowers. The flowers themselves are actually, they lack petals. They're actually sepals, but they look like petals. They have kind of waxy green heart-shaped leaves that are actually fairly varied in their leaf shape, but they always lack leaf margins, though they can be wavy. And then the really big, they have kind of the trifecta of plant propagation. They primarily spread by underground bulblets, similar to like a daffodil or other spring bulbs. But those bulblets expand more rapidly under the ground. And then you can see in this middle picture, this is on the stem itself. You'll see in the node, like where the leaf joins the stem, these little bulbules that are similar to like the little potato structures that are under the ground. They're a little more paler in appearance. And then seeds as well. So through all of those means, they are spread very rapidly on the landscape. And the bulblets that are born on the leaf axis will stay on the soil of the surface once it goes dormant for the year. And that's how it often gets unintentionally spread, just by the simple act of walking over an infestation when it's already gone dormant for the year and not knowing that those little bulblets are on the soil surface and they get spread around.
So they get stuck in your boots as you go hiking over them and you track them. But
Yes.
do they, and if you were to cut down the plant and just leave the plant lying there, these little above the ground bubble, whatever they're called, those little nodules are going to sprout new plants.
Yes, yeah. So those little bulblets are capable of spreading the plant in the same manner that the underground parts are, but often those little above ground parts are more easily spread further distances.
Got it.
And I don't know, Michelle, if you see, but people's hands when they raise them, but Tim,
no, I can't see that actually.
but Tim would like to talk.
Hey, so since Katie interrupted a little bit your presentation, we've had a little email exchange going for a bit, and I've had a question about when these bulbils become active. When are they actually capable of regenerating plants? Do you happen to know that, Michelle? Is it like sort of before flowering or after? They must ripen at some point in their development, is kind of what Liz and some of us have been kind of yapping about on email.
Okay, yeah, so they're kind of similar to seeds. So generally what will happen is once the plant goes dormant, which is around this time of year, you'll see a patch of bare ground. And often those little white bulbules will remain on the soil surface even after all the green vegetation has gone back into the energy stores of the little bulblets underground. And then those little bulbules above ground bulbs can get spread around and then like essentially planted in new areas. And then in the following season, they would germinate.
So it does take a full season for them to get spread around and germinate.
Yeah, I would think of them kind of as seeds, like
okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, part of this has been the discussions evolved around whether or not we should be bagging the clippings. If you go and clip them off early in the spring, do we need to be bagging the clippings as opposed to later in the season, you know, when maybe flowering or afterwards, when those bulbules have developed fully and are capable of, so that was always kind of because there's kind of a lot of work to bag clippings as opposed to just shearing and letting it, you know, lie in place.
If there's, my rule of thumb is if you're taking the energy to do something about it, I would want to make sure that that material gets properly disposed of, because these noxious weeds, their biology is to complete their life cycle as fast as possible, and they will often continue, if they still have life left in them, they'll continue to produce seed, they'll continue to have the little bulbules mature even if they're not connected to the roots anymore.
So we can can we assume that if we can see the bulbules on the stalks of the plants when we go trimming, that we need to bag the clippings?
I think that's a good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll get a little more into the disposal here in a minute.
Cool. I'm going to lower my hand.
Okay. I'll make sure to leave some time for discussion. But more just real quick here, I want to make sure that we have a good distinguishing way of looking at the characteristics of marsh marigold versus celandine. So there's a couple different native Caltha species, both of which don't occur in Arnold Creek. And the only other one that's yellow is Caltha palustris, which is really not a common plant around here at all. Like, I've never seen it growing in the Portland metro area. And anytime that you see something that looks like that in Portland, it's almost certainly going to be the Lesser Celandine. And if you want to like look at some more key characteristics to make sure, one of the first things to do is look underneath the flower. And if you see 3 little green petals or sepals, that is definitely a sure sign that it's the celandine. The marsh marigold doesn't have that. And then also the leaves are serrated like a knife on the native Caltha, and the celandine, it's always, there'll be variations, like they could be wavy, they could sometimes even be sort of lobed, but you're never going to have those fine serrations. And then the little bulbules on the stem is a feature that you'll only see on the celandine. And then if you were to dig it up, the native doesn't have any of the little bulblets, which you always see with the celandine. And you know, the reason why this is such a huge problem is that it starts coming up so early, December, when essentially the dead of winter, when nothing else is coming up yet. And I think that's, you know, one of the reasons why sometimes it's allowed to persist, is like, oh, how pretty, there's like nothing else growing right now. But then the problem with that is then all the native forbs and wildflowers basically don't have a place anymore, because by the time they want to come up out of the soil, the celandine is already occupied all their space. So they get very much displaced by the celandine. And celandine thrives in disturbance. It loves all of our like urban yards and even lawns, but then and especially in Arnold Creek and Tryon Creek, where we have a lot of water, it's quickly carried through roadside storm systems into our streams and across the landscape. And then by April, it's essentially melted back into the earth, and all the resources are back in underground, multiplied as more bulblets that'll come back the next year. And then essentially displacing all the insects and pollinators that would be relying on those spring ephemeral plants that persist through the summer months and into fall. So instead of, like you see here, you would essentially just have bare earth for the majority of the season, where you have migratory birds and most of our native insects active, and birds and wildlife. So recommended tools. So there's only really a couple options that have been heavily vetted and shown to be successful in the long term. As I mentioned, the underground parts are really like the like factories of the plant. Like that's any sort of mechanism for control is going to need to target the underground parts, because otherwise it would be like, you know, mowing a field of daffodils. Are the daffodils going to come back the next year? Of course they are. So it's really, you know, important to look at how those underground parts can be effectively controlled. And it's more difficult because you can't see them as easily, but those are really where the energy stores are. So my favorite method is to keep an eye out, and then as soon as I see a new patch, a new clump, I just go out with a sharp shovel and just dig it up, soil and all. I don't try to, save much of the soil because it's essentially contaminated with those little bulblets. If it's like a single plant, it's pretty easy actually to, if the soil is moist, to kind of use a little hori and kind of loosen the soil and kind of very carefully extract it without requiring too much soil. You can usually pull it out carefully and remove most of the soil around it. But if it's bigger than a few plants, like a foot by foot, then it's going to require essentially just like excavating that top layer of soil and carefully bagging it, putting the whole thing in the trash, making sure not to introduce it into either the city compost or certainly your home compost. And then keeping an eye out in that area and other areas to make sure nothing comes back. But this is time intensive, and on a large scale is actually fairly disruptive, as you can imagine, for the environment, because it's removing a lot of soil. So leads me to the next recommendation, which is suited for all sorts of infestations, from those small spotty ones and up to the larger infestations. And obviously we want to be judicious with herbicide, and this is a case where sometimes it's better to bite the bullet and go after it with a carefully managed and timed herbicide treatment than waiting years and then finally realizing there's no other way, and then going and actually having to use quite a bit more herbicide. This is also something that you would want to target when the leaves have emerged, but before there's like more than 50% of overall flowering. So kind of early flowering. Even more importantly than that is timing it so that there's a nice dry weather window, because the leaves are waxy. And then using your hand sprayer, like we're talking small targeted equipment, to apply the systemic herbicide to just the plant itself, and preventing it from we're not like broadcast spraying all huge area, and for the most part your goal is to use the least amount of product as possible. And then again, you want to read the label, and if you're using a bulk product that you have to dilute yourself, you want to make sure that there is a surfactant as well to help carry the herbicide down into those tubers. And after 1 to 3 years, you should see a noticeable difference on the landscape. And there's a really good resource based out of Oregon State University called the National Pesticide Information Center that actually staffs phones every morning, weekday mornings. And they also have a lot of really good fact sheets on their website as well. So that is a good resource to consult and give them a call to if you have any questions. And then just making sure not to move the infestation to new areas. So if you are working in an area, brush your boots off. You want to make sure that those little bulbils that we talked about aren't tracked around. If I had this on my property, I would flag out all the areas with like little bamboo stakes and flagging, and try to keep my pets and kids and myself out of those areas as best I could, even throughout the year. And then certainly don't plant it intentionally. And then if you do find success, sharing those stories with your neighbors, or you're, willing to put some volunteer hours in to help a neighbor who has, a larger problem than you, that's always great. Many hands make light work, and that's certainly the case here. And I'll make sure that you have these digital resources, but there are some great online resources that talk about these management tools in more detail. So I'm going to stop the screen share. I can just so I can see everyone, but I can pull it back up if there are questions.
Well, I appreciate you being willing to share this presentation, and if we could had your permission to post it on our website, that would be an easy access point for other people there. But I do see that Tim has his hand up.
I'm back. Hey, so on the glyphosate spraying, is it just kind of once a year, like early in the spring, but just one application is what you guys would suggest?
Yeah, so
for that control method.
Yeah, so
not continuously spraying throughout the season, not every other week application.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So the way glyphosate works is that it's very slow acting, and that's a good thing because that allows the product to get down into the tubers where we want to see those energy stores targeted. And so there's not going to be like a quick burn down, and you'll probably see a similar sort of reaction to how it would normally be going dormant for the year, and you're really going to see the improvement the next year when less of it comes back. So yeah,
right,
it's generally just one application, and and then if you're ready and you're keeping an eye out on the weather forecast, you can we often do have a little dry weather window in the spring.
Yeah, sometimes there is like a week where you can get, because you just need a little bit, or you need a few days, right? You need it to spray it, dry it, and or let it dry and absorb, and then it's in, and you don't,
We also have a question in the chat with the woman that had problems with her audio. If you want to take a look at, it just says, how long is it going to take to eradicate the stand if you're cutting, removing, or burning foliage?
So that is a good question, and I don't have a good answer on that. Certainly longer, because it's anytime where your management technique is to starve the below ground parts. If the below ground parts have a lot of energy stores like the celandine does with the bulbs, it's going to take some patience. So it's a matter of like, how quickly do you want to see results? How much labor do you have available to you? Can you go at it every time you see more plants come up, and it's going to keep trying to come up. So it's not just like a one time, you cut it down and then wait for it again next year. It's probably going to be multiple times throughout the year, or throughout the spring.
And I can give an example. I had 2 stands in my yard, and one I was more interested in because I was planting natives there. So I dug it out, and I was able to see visually how much root structure they had going on. The other stand I let go a year and then dealt with the following year, and they both established the same year. And the root structure on the second that I had stalled a year was massively larger. Yeah. So I refer to this plant as an attractive Borg. For all of you that know Star Trek references, the resistance is futile, it will take over, and it won't pay rent. So that's my personal attack.
Good analogy.
If there were small infestations of it starting in the ditch along the north side of Arnold, is it worthwhile for us garlic mustard people to redirect on that and go get those and go get that as much as we possibly can now? I've been seeing it for a few years, and it's kind of slowly, it's the clumps are getting bigger. I mean, it's starting to settle in. So,
well, certainly on, like the priority list, I would, garlic mustard is like a regional priority. We're basically any garlic mustard that we know of in the whole Pacific Northwest, with very few exceptions, is being managed for eradication. So, but celandine is typically managed before garlic mustard flowers. So, it would just basically mean like having the garlic mustard crew start in February.
Start a little earlier and go attack it. And then the only other question I kind of have so replanting with natives, like Katie was just saying, that does not necessarily sort of crowd it out, does it?
No, it's
not a good strategy for controlling it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to, it's because celandine is just it comes out before any of the other native forbs. It definitely has an upper hand, and it can survive under the canopy, so you can't really shade it out like you can blackberry.
Yeah, that was my question, was can it get shaded out? Like, okay.
No, it's really just a matter of finding where it's recently invaded and going after those as quick as possible.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for presenting, and I'm going to mute myself and let others ask questions.
Well, Carrie followed up with a follow-up, but that is, and she's held on to the idea of starving out the bulbs. Do you have an estimate on how long that would take?
I don't. There has been, I've seen, other people looking at the flaming and the top topping of vegetation, but in similar studies with other plants that have a similar sort of biology, it's going to take a lot more time and resources to see the effects. What will probably happen is you'll prevent it from expanding as rapidly, but you're not going to necessarily be eradicating that core patch.
Yeah, I really think she wants a number, but if you don't know of any, I'll give one: 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
There. Okay, and I am no expert, so I will not claim any responsibility for that number.
There hasn't been a lot of scientific studies looking at all the different methods, but certainly anything that you want dealt with in less than 3 to 5 years, that's going to have to take a really proactive approach that targets the underground structures.
And digging out, I dug out about 8 inches of soil in an area about 1 foot by 3 feet, and only 2 plants came up the next year. And then I just got out there with a spade and took that whole little circle out. And so it does work digging it out. But again, that was a small patch.
Yeah. Yeah, outside perimeter for sure. Yeah, you want to work on those new, on the frontiers and work your way in, because at least there you have a better chance of spending fewer resources to get that improvement. And you're also preventing it from expanding.
Well, I really appreciate this, because I saw a patch on Arnold, like you said, Tim, on the north side, right by 35th. And I showed up the next day with a shovel and a bag, and I dug it out because I just, it's just, it takes over. It is the Borg. And there on the downhill flow, I just knew it was going to end up everywhere. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I should have kept going down Arnold. I didn't see any others. I just dug out that one patch, but I'm willing to chip into the garlic mustard group and help out with that.
Well, and I think that's part of it, is to, like, there's places where it's taken over and there's bigger areas of it, but then there's these little satellite colonies that are starting to show up that are kind of like, well, yeah, I could go get that, you know, like, and then how fast is it growing? I mean, I've just been kind of watching it for a year or 2 or 3, maybe in some cases, but
yeah,
I would definitely. I don't want to make it worse, you know. But yeah, like we could keep it from getting into the main feeds of the creek, if, potentially. I mean, at least in some cases, we might be able to help with that. So, like ditches and in places in the right of way.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Michelle. We're going to post your presentation, so I will encourage everyone from Arnold Creek to reach out to you directly so we can just flood you with tons of questions. Yeah, but we do want to be a good steward of the land we live near and this watershed, and so anything we can do, we have some really dedicated people that are willing to put in the time and effort and do things the right way. So thank you so much for coming, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. And I will just throw out there, if anyone is trying to reach me in the next couple weeks or months, anytime before the end of June, I'm essentially not on email. I'm out in the field working on garlic mustard. So this isn't the best time of year to reach me, but I definitely welcome you to do so. And if you don't hear back from me, try again. And I usually am much more responsive closer to celandine season after garlic mustard burns down.
Yeah, when everything's dormant and yeah, right. We're all hibernating. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thanks again to Liz and Tim and the others that are active on the garlic mustard crew. We really appreciate keeping our neighborhood healthy and happy.